Here we go.
All right, we're here in Conroe. This is what, the 26th of October?
Yep.
Right.
And okay, good. I'm okay on that. This is Brian Lantz. We're recording this so we can put it up on our website later on for the LaRouche movement, for the Schiller Institute. And so let me just jump in. I mean, what we're really interested in doing is developing a new capability, a new kind of self-organizing capability in the country of citizens. We've been at it for, some of us, for 45 years with Mr. LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche. So we're not new at this, and we have a lot of resources. We have websites, we have publications. We brought along some of the latest pamphlets here for people, but also we put out our Executive Intelligence Review puts out a daily alert, which is, you know, like 10, 15 pages long. That's available daily. Strategic developments around the world that we assess. It's not just, it's not like Drudge Report or something. It's not just a compendium of whatever's out there, but an actual strategic assessment. And this is an ongoing part of our work. We publish the Executive Intelligence Review magazine, which comes out weekly. It's been coming out for 45 years, give or take, on a weekly basis. And so that's available by subscription. We have YouTube sites. We also have, and we'll come back to that at the very end. Why I'm mentioning this is this self-organizing process. We're providing the ideas, not just information, but the ideas that are needed. We're not just picking these ideas out of the sky. So what I'm going to try to do briefly here is give you a sense of where we're coming from, what we're bringing to the table, what we're bringing to the debate, continuing to bring to the debate, and discussion in the country. And this is a remarkable moment. President Trump announced a matter of only a certain number of days ago that he was getting the U.S. troops out of Syria. And he had said he had promised to do that when he had campaigned, not only out of Syria, but out of what he called these endless wars that had cost us over $8 trillion and left the regions where these wars occurred in worse, more unstable condition than they were before we went in. And it wasn't the money so much as the loss of lives and damaged individuals, wounded, and so forth. The consequence, not just for the individual combatants, but for their families and so on. And if you may have seen some of this. I mean, you don't get this in the fake news media, but you may have come across it otherwise. You know, video of speeches that Trump gave, either from the White House or otherwise, and he recently hammered on this point, pointing out just he utilized the process of him going out, you know, to meet these air transport planes coming in, carrying the coffins, and meeting the families that were gathering out at the air base there outside of Washington to greet, you know, their young men and women coming home. And he mentioned how this was the toughest part of his job, this and writing letters, you know, to the families of those that had lost a loved one in these wars. That this was the toughest part of his job. So I won't go through the details. If you haven't found them, find them. If you have trouble, let us know. We'll forward you some links. But the point is, this was a remarkable action by the President of the United States to break with what has, you know, gone on endlessly, these endless wars. And you look at the situation in Washington now, and you see on both sides of the aisle, you see the majority of Democrats and Republicans attacking Trump for pulling the troops out of Syria. And the situation now, frankly, is improving very rapidly. The Syrians, the Russians, the Turks, the Kurds, all of them are working, compromising, figuring out how to deal with the border area and so forth. You know, people have questions, we can get into that, but you know, by getting the U.S. troops out of there, I mean, remember, Obama, as General Michael Flynn made the point when he was serving as intelligence director under Obama, General Michael Flynn made the point that we were feeding ISIS, we were fueling the creation of the caliphate there. We were the ones responsible by our intervention. Trump pulling out the U.S. forces out of the region and the role that some of our forces were involved in there, you know, our so-called intelligence agencies and so forth, has actually created the basis for resolving problems that go back to the time of Sykes-Picot and the British Empire and French Empire and so forth. So this is a remarkable break with the past, yet here he is opposed on both sides of the aisle. And our point, a point that Mr. LaRouche made on his 90th birthday, some 7 years ago now, was that the two-party system has ceased to exist. It doesn't exist. It's shattered, it's broken, and that's certainly all the more so today. President Trump made the point that he got elected by running against whatever it was, 20 other Republicans. You know, he basically ran against the Republican Party to get elected president, right? He wasn't just running against Democrats, he was running against, you know, what was left of the Republican Party. So this is the background for saying, okay, we're asserting a principle, a concept. We're calling it, as the working concept, the Committees of Correspondence, that create networks of self-organizing citizenry, right, around the highest, most profound ideas to shape both the defense of the presidency now against the impeachment effort and so forth, but also from the standpoint of rebuilding America, or to borrow the phrase, making America great again, right? And continuing to make it great in the sense of durable greatness. So that's the Committees of Correspondence. The term is borrowed from Sam Adams and Benjamin Franklin. The Committees of Correspondence that they created helped, really was the backbone of what made a successful American Revolution. You know, every war is, on the one hand, is fought on the battlefield. On the other hand, the peace is won with a conception of victory in the sense of, again, to use the phrase durable survival or durable victory. So Trump is getting us out of Syria, and there's certainly going to be back and forth, and we have this ongoing, completely unconstitutional impeachment effort. Unconstitutional in the sense of not as a partisan issue, but from a nonpartisan view, simply looking at the Constitution, what's going on right now is completely unconstitutional. So we have that, but Trump is breaking free. This is only increasing the hysteria. Many people will think, oh, well, Trump is a shoo-in for re-election in 2020. But don't bet on that. We have to ensure the process going forward, whether it's Trump or anyone else in terms of the presidency, we have to ensure that the right policies are implemented. Trump at this point should be reelected. But what is Trump supposed to do besides getting us out of Syria? He's got a huge problem in terms of the economy. I'm not just talking about I'm not talking about the stock market. I'm talking about the economy. On the financial side of it, this is becoming more and more public now, but for some 6 weeks, the Federal Reserve has been engaged in a massive printing press operation into the overnight repo market which involves 12, 24-hour, 48-hour movement of money between banks. You know, on any given day, one bank may close with more money than it needs, and another bank is short, and so you have an overnight market where money is bought and sold, you know, with a fractional difference, and it's a little quick money for one bank, and the other bank is paying a little, and it's just a matter of covering under normal circumstances, it's just covering shortfalls on any given day. Well, beginning about 6 weeks ago, the repo market, this is the big banks, this is the big money center banks, started freezing up, and the Fed began pumping money in, 30, 40 billion, then it was 50 billion, 60 billion. Now it's up to, I believe, 120 billion a day, $120 billion a day being pumped into the repo market to keep it liquid, simply to allow the financial institutions to clear their books or balance their books, you know, on any given day. So something is up. We don't pretend to say we know exactly what's up, but this is public. I'm not telling you something that's secret, you know, that you have to go to some hidden website to find out about, you know, and you don't know if it's true or not. This is Market Watch, Bloomberg. Elizabeth Warren is accusing J.P. Morgan Chase of having deliberately refused to provide liquidity into the market to force the Fed to go to QE, more quantitative easing. Well, that begs the question, why is anybody talking about quantitative easing? That's what we did in 2007, 2008. In other words, regardless of Elizabeth Warren, the point is we're in the middle of an onrushing financial collapse, which is bigger than 2007, 2008. Remember, 2007, 2008, the so-called, what was it, the something recession, the Great Recession, they came up with that piece of nonsense to term it. You know, that we didn't solve anything there. We just kicked the can down the road. We provided liquidity. You know, the banks didn't write down financial paper. The derivatives market wasn't wiped clean, and so on and so forth. We simply sustained it, sustained the bubble, kept it going. So this is what Trump is facing. Now, what's required here is that we have to return to principles. And this is very much the heart of Lyndon LaRouche's work in science, including the science of economics, physical economy, what he termed physical economy or retermed physical economy. But I'm talking about principles in a more fundamental sense, and that's what he meant. Principles in terms of universal physical principles. You know, we were talking earlier, you know, you got to, you know, if you're a farmer, you got to know how to plant, you got to know how to deal with the environment, you have to know the physical world around you, you know, and act in it appropriately, right? You have to, in that sense, know the laws of the universe, at least a few of them, right? Or you're not gonna get to harvest time. So this is what has to be returned to. This is what was called the American system. You can put up the first slide, Mike. Okay, lift that up, and we'll catch up with these slides. Here's Trump, and it's the presidency we're talking about, and this is going to be critical. The Constitution embodies the American system. The Constitution places in the institution of the presidency as an institution the power to do what Trump, for example, did in Syria. He made the decision. You got a lot of, you know, on Iran, you know, there's a bunch of people, including John Bolton and company, including Democrats, that were saying, let's go bomb Iran because they knocked out, you know, one of our drones, you know, over their territory. And Trump said, how many lives is it going to cost? How many Iranians are going to die? Well, 100, 200. They said, it's not worth it. We're not going to do it. That was an act by the president. All these other people were standing there twiddling their fingers at that point. You know, they had all kinds of plans and schemes and so forth. The president made that decision. He said, no, we're not going to do it. Syria, he acted. Now, in the same sense, profound sense, this is the power of the presidency to deal with the onrushing financial crisis. And more broadly establish the United States once again on the basis of principles. Go ahead to the next. This is our organizing. We're involved in a lot of organizing across the United States. We were down at City Hall speaking before the City Council, Joe Jennings and was it Keisha Raj? Huh? Marcia Bowen, presenting on the fraud of the so-called CO2 disaster. And this is a great pamphlet, just going through very systematically the hoax and the truth and so forth of the basic science. We were also over at the Port of Houston, giving similar testimony there. Here we are. This what's on the screen here is in New York, I assume in the precincts of Columbia University. But we are out, our organizers, young and old, are out organizing, including right there in front. You see, we are going to the moon. You know, we're reviving the U.S. space program. We're supporting Trump, another initiative by the President of the United States. We are going back to the moon. We're going to land the first woman and another man on the moon by 2024. That's the commitment. That's his intention. So we're out to mobilize Americans and spark Americans with a new optimism about what we can do and what through the presidency we can do. Next slide. This is Mr. LaRouche, Lyndon LaRouche. Some of you may remember him. Many of you may remember him. We find in the field, we ask him, do you know this man? Show him in this picture. So, no, I don't think so. Then we start talking about him, his campaigns for presidency and so forth. Oh, yeah! Talk about his policies on building infrastructure, reviving manufacturing, science driver program for the United States, and so on. And suddenly it starts clicking in. LaRouche ran campaigns for the president, a really single campaign for the presidency over 2 decades. What was he doing? He was deliberately, very consciously, keeping in front of the American people the ideas of the American system, the ideas of what the presidency could do. He presented the Moon-Mars project in the 1980s, right? Going from the moon and on to Mars, right? He presented on what it would take to rebuild the cities of the United States, to rebuild our manufacturing, cities like Pittsburgh, our industrial heartland, to turn the Rust Bucket back into an industrial, productive region of the country, water projects, and so on and so forth. So these ideas are out there and fresh, and really in part, and this is important in terms of what we're doing today, this is the power of ideas. This is the power of the Committees of Correspondence. Is the power of ideas is reflected in the fact that the reason why President Trump is in the White House today is because of Lyndon LaRouche. Not solely, but Lyndon LaRouche and his ideas and his independent campaigns, his half-hour TV broadcast. You know, this was picked up by Ross Perot. Similarly, this is then really a foreshadowing of what Trump did. When people responding to Trump were responding based on, kind of inherited or an echo that they heard of what they had seen earlier with LaRouche or recalled from LaRouche. So anyway, so what is this guy's policies? Let's go on to the next. All right. Okay. We all know what that is. That's a galaxy. Swirling about, a spiral galaxy. And we've got a lot to learn out there.
It's supposed to be at least 2 trillion.
Yes. That's, according to the Hubble telescope count, there's at least 2 trillion galaxies out there. each one of them has, I don't know what, a trillion stars or billions of stars. Look, for somebody to say we're running out of resources, I mean, give me a break. Go on to the next. Now, here we have something very simple, right? We have something preserved there, a nautilus shell of a sort, right? And notice that same spiral in its shape and form. Go on to the next. An underpinning of LaRouche's thinking, in the most profound sense, is that we are part of creation. Creation is occurring. Here's one of LaRouche's books. I put it up here. There are no limits to growth. This was his response, our response to the forest and meadows studies, so-called, out of MIT, saying there are limits to growth. We're running out of minerals, mankind's going to exhaust resources, we have to cut back. And so, of course, by now, virtually everything they forecast has been debunked. But of course, that doesn't stop. We got the whole new version, the CO2 global warming hoax is a new version of the same thing, being pushed by many of the same people. But at the core of LaRouche's thinking is something, and you find echoes of this going back to Plato, and forward to Kepler and Leibniz and on to Einstein and so forth, is that we are part of creation. Man is a creative creature. Man is made in the living image of God. You don't have to be religious and of a certain denomination to comprehend that. We're here, right? If we're here, this universe created us in some broader sense, or singular sense. And so the fact that we are creative and man transforms the environment around him, that's the point of this, what you see up on the wall, the anti-entropic nature of human activity. We constantly supersede finite resources. We overcome limits to growth. We are an active participant in God's creation, and the universe itself is growing and developing. And in Plato, this is referred to as hierozoic monism. Again, a foreshadowing. But we know this much better today in terms of, we know the non-living structures increasingly in terms of our own Earth and the regolith of other planets. We have the growth of the biosphere. We know much more about how life has grown and developed on the surface of the Earth over eons of life, and that biosphere has transformed. The cliffs of Dover were made by, that's a collection of what we're living in organisms, right? I mean, the living matter has transformed inorganic nature. And likewise, mankind in turn has contributed to transforming nature further as a positive force in the universe, on Earth. There are more flora and fauna on Earth today than there was at any point in time, so far as we know. And a density of life made possible by canals, waterworks, so on and so forth. And we've increased the energy consumption per capita as we've advanced from wood to coal and so on. On to the next. I'm just quickly summarizing this. And this gets us into LaRouche's 4 laws, which are the 4 laws of organizing an economic recovery for the United States. This is what President Trump requires as a program. And believe me, the financial oligarchy in London and Wall Street are absolutely hysterical. They see in President Trump someone who's acting independently, initiating, breaking the bonds, right? He could respond to this crisis with a full restoration of the American system and with a fuller comprehensive sense of that system today than what Alexander Hamilton, John Quincy Adams, Lincoln, or Roosevelt had earlier, or Kennedy with the space program. So let's move on here. First of all, Glass-Steagall, the restoration of Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was passed in 1930. Does everyone here know Glass-Steagall? Oh, okay. It's named after the senator and congressman that led that sponsored the legislation in Congress. I believe it was in March itself, in 1933. At that time, presidents were sworn in March, not in January. Before the end of the month, Glass-Steagall was passed and placed and put up a firewall. This was in the context, Roosevelt declared a bank holiday. The banks were closed for a week across the country. Banks had been folding right and left. People know about the 29 crash, but in 33, the banks were folding. They were all going like dominoes. And so this is just as Roosevelt was coming in. This was probably something triggered deliberately out of London and Wall Street, in the sense that they decided, okay, let's dump this on Roosevelt's porch, there at the White House. But Roosevelt, acting willfully, declared a bank holiday, closed the banks, sent in the bank auditors to open up the books and find out what was there. At the same time, Glass-Steagall was passed. Glass-Steagall put up a firewall. It said, on the one hand, we're going to backstop, the U.S. government is going to backstop the commercial banking system of the United States. This is when the FDIC was created, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, just as one feature of this. We're going to protect the productive side of the banking system. We've got to revive it. We send in the auditors. We're going to sort this thing out. We're going to see what we can save, and so forth. But on the other side of the firewall, what it simultaneously said is that those commercial banks cannot engage in speculation. Those commercial banks cannot buy and sell insurance. They cannot be in the insurance business. And other activities, speculative, they cannot buy and sell bonds and stocks. In other words, commercial banks had to be commercial banks, and they had to be lending into the real economy, okay? Everything on the other side of the firewall, hey, you're on your own. We're not giving you a dime. You can rot in hell, okay? On the other hand, if people want to have money and they want to invest in an investment bank that's going to speculate with their money, well, we're not outlawing it, but there's no protection. Now think about 2007, 2008. We bailed out these banks. Glass-Steagall was repealed in 1999. Glass-Steagall had been what had protected the banking system of the United States. It was chipped away at over the decade or so, decade and a half leading up to 1999, but it wasn't until 1999 that it was repealed jointly by Republicans and Democrats. And this was a singular trigger for the explosion of speculation. Commercial banks, to compete, if for no other reason, had to go into speculation to make the money, to keep up, to compete with other banking, with others in the banking system. And so Glass-Steagall's reintroduction is absolutely essential. Now, President Trump stated that he supports Glass-Steagall. When he campaigned, he stated his support for the reintroduction of Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall was part of the Republican platform in 2016. It was part of the Democratic platform in 2016. Elizabeth Warren was a sponsor of Glass-Steagall legislation in the Congress. John McCain was a sponsor in the Senate. So I'm saying we're not talking about here's something esoteric. This is something this is a fundamental battle line on who controls the financial system. Is the financial system under the willful control of mankind, in this case under the willful control of us, the United States, under the powers of the Constitution, right, to ensure the continued growth and productivity of our economy, or is it left, to the quote-unquote free market? In other words, deregulation, right? The term, the concept that took over in the course of the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. Deregulate everything, get the government out of the way. Everything will be fine if you just let the magic of the marketplace, work itself out. And we see the consequences of that in the booms and busts. Not just 2007, 2008, but the 87 stock market crash, the dot-com bubble collapse, and before that, the collapse of the whole, United States. The Midwest turned into a rust bucket because the money fled. The money fled productive activity, increasingly went into speculation, into what's now a $1.4 trillion, quadrillion dollar global derivatives market in speculation, which is where your money, if you put money into Wells Fargo, Bank of America, etc., that's where that money is going. It doesn't go into the real economy. Now this has, so let me just stop here parenthetically and just step back and think about it. Look at Texas, look at the United States. We have all these small towns, right, Mark? We have all these small towns. We have, and they're drying up and blowing away. Why are they drying up and blowing away? Well, there's no infrastructure. Why would a plant operate in a small town in Texas if there's no train to and from that town anymore? What if there's no airline connections, not just for people, but for transporting goods? Under deregulation of trucking, air, and so forth that began in under Jimmy Carter, we basically said we're going to, instead of a regulated transportation system in which freight companies so forth operating on the interstate system had to provide a modicum of transport to every single solitary town in the country and so on, and likewise the airlines as a regulated system, we said we're going to just leave this to the marketplace, which is so much more efficient. Well, now people complain about all the people rushing into the cities and urban sprawl and so on and so forth. Well, where did that come from? The people moving into our cities are from rural areas. That's where they're coming from, including from across the border, right? We have a huge immigration crisis in the world because people are moving out of rural areas into urban areas, not out of desperation as much as anything else. We have to return to American system policies here and in collaboration with other nations. Just by comparison. I mean, this is really important to think about, and this is why there's this hysteria about China. China has lifted 800 million people out of poverty in the course of the last 2.5 decades. 800 million people. They regulate their economy. I'm not saying we do it the same way they do. They have their own system, their own culture, and so on and so forth. But I'm indicating to you that the crisis that exists not only in the United States with immigration and migration and exists in Europe and Africa and so forth is not somehow God-given. And it's not the result of there being too many people. It's something that can be addressed. And we were the nation that provided the first model for how you do that, the first example of how you do that. Okay, so on to the next.
Brian,
if
I might say on
okay.
that, you contrast what you just said to the strikes going on right now in Europe.
Yeah.
That's why that's
Yeah,
happening.
around the world, internationally, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Keisha's bringing up a very important point. Right now there's you have farmers are going into Bonn and Strasbourg, other cities across Europe right now, striking farmers, right? Bringing their tractors in to cities, hundreds and hundreds of tractors. You hardly read about this in the U.S. press. I don't know of any coverage really.
No.
Not only in Germany, but in the Netherlands and so forth, over the fact that the collapse of prices of food prices that farmers actually get, not what the cartels get in between as the middlemen, but what farmers actually get. And the demands of so-called green policies, limiting CO2 gases. U.S. Beef producers are being green-lined in the United States, not just in Europe as well. You want a loan? The rollover for next year? The market for, because we have these new green policies that are being imposed through the European Union, that are now coming into play in the United States, well, this is not a good loan for us to make. Not because you're not a good farmer or a rancher, but because these the recognition of global warming and the changes we're going to have to make, raising beef is no longer a productive investment. So literally, this is beginning to occur right here in the United States. But in Europe, this is now a huge uproar. In France, you have first the firemen went out. I mean, look, if you're not producing, if we're not growing as an economy here or in Europe, in terms of the physical economic output of the economy, then you have to impose austerity. You can't pay for veterans benefits on the level it's required, provide the services. You can't build the roads and maintain the roads. You can't maintain the sewage system, right? Yeah, you can let Houston go to hell and you can move out in the suburbs, but then you pay more and more trying to get into the city to go to the job, and your life becomes more and more miserable. I mean, hold on a second. Stop the circus, for a second here. Let's catch up here with what's going on. Throughout you have in Chile, that's supposed to be the model country of stability in South America, according to the financial markets, it's completely blown up. Mass demonstrations, riots going on. People across the country have just had it. They're meeting in city squares to figure out what can be done, what should be done. They've had it. They've been immiserated. Argentina, Ecuador, and so on and so forth. So you have this spreading process. We have the GM strike. We'll have the Ford strike probably next. There's more to come. Farmers are in desperate conditions here in the United States. Quite aside from the fact that, most farmers are over 60 years old. They're 70, 75, 80 years old. Because the kids are leaving, right? Because there's no future out there in the farm and ranching lands of Texas or the United States. Okay, so Glass-Steagall, we have to address this. We have to shut down the speculation and redirect resources into rebuilding the economy. Second step, as the next slide, if you can get to that, Mike. Okay, yeah, a national bank. You can call it a national infrastructure bank, but effectively you're talking about a national bank of the United States. Well, it was first created under Alexander Hamilton as the first treasurer, with the full support of the Congress and the President of the United States. We created a national bank which provided credit out into infrastructure directed to building up the United States. This is after the American Revolution. We were flat broke. Worse than the 1930s. I mean, we were flat broke after the American Revolution. We organized willfully, right? This is man acting willfully to transform nature from man. We willfully acted to create an institution alongside there were lots of private banks and so on. We created a national bank which provided credit. Today, to rebuild the infrastructure of the United States, we have to have a national bank to provide long-term credit to the term of $8, $10, $15 trillion in credits over time to rebuild the infrastructure of this economy over decades, over the coming 20, 30, 40 years, within, say, roughly a generation or more. Think about it. Right now, you could not have a high-speed rail system in the United States because we don't have the electrical power to provide it, to run it. We barely keep the lights on in Texas, and there's less and less manufacturing and industry in Texas. Right? We've got Dallas-Fort Worth, and we've got some pockets in San Antonio and a little here and there. But the point is that we don't have the electricity to manage what we've got. If you were going to triple or quadruple the amount of manufacturing output in the United States, you're talking about a tremendous increase you're talking about at least the equivalent of 200 nuclear power plants in the United States. Our colleagues, Jason Ross and Ben Dennison, crunched the numbers on some of this. And you can use coal and gas plants. You could factor that in. We're not opposing the use of coal power plants. Modern coal-fired plants can be completely well utilized and efficient and non-polluting. Gas power plants fine as well. But to give you an idea, you need at least 200 nuclear power plants in the United States, above what we have now, above the production, electrical production today, to quadruple, triple or quadruple manufacturing in the United States. A high-speed rail system, you're talking about 100 nuclear power plants, additionally, to give you a sense of the amount of energy. So when we're saying about rebuilding the infrastructure of this country, just energy by itself, people don't even think about these in these terms today because we're not used to thinking about them anymore. We used to think about these things, we planned for these things, but we stopped doing it. So a national bank, as you may know, Trump has called for a national infrastructure program, and there's been discussion of it, and his campaign proposed a national infrastructure bank, funded otherwise. But in combination with Glass-Steagall, as in the 1930s, then Roosevelt utilized an existing institution, small institution called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He massively expanded it, and we provided the equivalent of hundreds of billions of dollars, probably over $1 trillion worth of credit into the U.S. economy, equivalent to today's dollars, to infrastructure across the United States through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. We also financed things like the Tennessee Valley Authority and other major projects. We rebuilt the infrastructure of the United States. We're living off the locks and dams that were built in that period today. They've not been replaced since. Right? So all of this look, the banks are bankrupt. The banks are freezing up. The banks are not lending. If you write off all of the derivative speculation, those banks, you're just wiping the crap off the books of those financial institutions. Those banks then do not have the quantities of credit that can be turned around and utilized in the real economy. As in the 1930s, the government has to step forward and fill the void. When the banks collapsed in 1933, the government stepped forward through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and other programs like CCC, the WPA, and government funding directly of things like the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Grand Coulee Dam System, and so on, to rebuild the country. Okay, on to the next year. I'm just trying to provide some background. And then, in addition to that bank and those credits, what you need in combination with that is a science driver. We've got to drive productivity in the United States, where productivity currently is around 1% per annum. Productivity growth. Yeah, it virtually doesn't exist. Okay? Because, I'll give you an example, they've played these games for decades now with computers. I'm not talking about, there's lots of ways they play games with computers, and it's all worthless. But the algorithms and whatnot. But one of the games they played was, we're every certain number of years, the number of gigawatts or whatever that's available to power a computer is increasing. The power of our computers is increasing by a certain rate per annum or per decade or whatever. So while we don't know how this is actually increasing productivity in the economy, we'll guesstimate that this increase in the use of computers and the power of computers is resulting in an increase of productivity into the real economy. Guess what? It was never there. There was not, because most of what computers are used for is moving paper. If you distinguish between the real economy and overhead, as LaRouche does in his economics, if you look at the physical economy, we can come back to this. Obviously, this increase in productivity and paper shuffling isn't a contribution to the real economy. It's going into overhead. So in place of this kind of nonsense, we need a science driver that will drive increases of real productivity into the physical economy. The last example of that was the Kennedy moonshot, right, which existed long after Kennedy's own assassination in terms of the payback. Roughly $10 for every dollar spent. But we keep getting paybacks up to today, so it's a multiple of that. But the point is that a science driver a competent science driver program today is required as part of initiating a rebuilding of the U.S. economy. And so we're specifying, LaRouche specified, as part of his 4 laws, and I have LaRouche's writing on his short paper, it's like 3 pages long, summarizing the 4 laws for you to take with you, specified a crash program for fusion energy. Not fission, fusion. We've got fission, we've got to improve that, develop it, expand it, move to 3rd and 4th generation and so forth. Other countries are doing that. Russia just had a huge conference with 50 nations of Africa in Sochi, and one of the 2 days was devoted to the transfer of nuclear science as well as nuclear technology in terms of nuclear power plants, turnkey plants, to African nations. Okay, they're going forward with it. They're going to be exporting it on a large scale, even larger than they're doing already. So we need to get with it on this. But beyond that, fusion, you know, the fusing of light atoms, helium, isotopes, deuterium, hydrogen isotope, and so forth. The fusing is the process that goes on in the sun. It produces an order of magnitude or greater amounts of energy beyond nuclear. And it allows, the fusion torch technology allows us to recycle all waste, including nuclear waste. So, but always, it means that we will utilize, we won't need garbage dumps. That's a shorthand way of putting it. And that means that all resources can be reused. So fusion energy, which you have multiple programs on. This is the picture here is a private project going on in the United States. But you also have the U.S. government programs, or government helps finance a number of programs. There's the ITER project in France. China has programs. Japan has programs, and so on. So this is something that's just been systematically underfunded, but it's been right there on the horizon. A crash program on this, combined with a crash program for space, in which fusion will play the critical role in getting to Mars within days, as opposed to months, is the other feature of this. But then, again, the payoffs of this in terms of material science, other areas, it's not just the production of fusion energy or fusion technologies, but the spin-offs getting there that will multiply through the economy if we have a productive economy to absorb those new technologies. So those are the main features. So coming back, this is the program which we're putting forward, have been putting forward, that we've etched in stone in a certain sense, that we want to multiply in terms of the radiating effects of this, the deliberation, the discussion of these concepts, to create the environment where Trump, in fact, President Trump can indeed move with these policies, as he's going to be required to do, starting with Glass-Steagall, to meet this onrushing financial collapse. He's got partners internationally to join with him in this. Russia and China, as he says, are it's good to be friends with them. That's a good thing, as he puts it. They're fully open to collaborating in dealing with this global financial crisis that's coming on, which they've talked about. Putin's talked about. Xi Jinping's talked about. Prime Minister Abe of Japan's talked about. You know, this is an open secret in terms of what's coming up now in terms of the crisis. So this can also be dealt with on a global scale, and Trump is a president that's capable of doing that. But the key is the Committees of Correspondence. The key is a new, shall we say, formal but informal, patient but impatiently patient process of organizing the American people into an effective body, a willful body. And what we're recruiting you to become is the training officers of this process, right? Not just to become the rank and file, but become the officers, if you will, informally, of this, the leadership of this process. Just to come back to, I mean, what I've tried to summarize here, it's available on our websites. It's available on LaRouchePAC.com. Our international work is available on Schiller Institute. .com. The LaRouchePub.com, our publications website. Subscriptions are available there for the Daily Alert and the EIR, but also a lot of material is just available on the homepage for anybody to just go there and access. And you can do the search engine, and you can go to every single writing that Lyndon LaRouche has done, or we've done on virtually any topic, is available through the search engine on the EIR website, going back 45 years. You know, in other words, there's no shortage of access to the most best and greatest ideas and the collaborative work of our friends around the world over 4+ decades. Let's go to the LaRouche PAC website now, if we can, Mike, just briefly. And the idea is to take the videos on these websites, take the printed material, share them with friends, bring together community meetings, chapter meetings. I'm sorry?
You wanted the get active part?
Well, I wanted to go to the home. This is the homepage. If you haven't been there before, this is LaRouchePAC.com. This is, every day this is updated with a new leading item and so on. If you click, could you go back one, Mike? I'm sorry. Just so people can see the transition. Okay, there's the homepage. And then, Mike, what are you doing? You're clicking on Get Active. Okay? Clicking on Get Active. And then you go Take Action, Committees of Correspondence. And can you move down that page, or is that too complicated? No. Anyway, this is being fleshed out now. So here's a let our political leaders know what the American people stand for on impeachment. You know, halting the impeachment effort. So here's I guess a short video. Yeah, a video on that, right?
Right.
Below that is material on Glass-Steagall, on stopping the financial crisis, and other materials, right? Is that correct? Okay.
Go back up so they can see the committees, see what that's about. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Just to give you a sense, I mean, it's easy to find, and once you're there, can you go up further, a little bit further? Maybe it doesn't. Yeah, where the 3 lines are on the left, if you click on that, then that drops down, and there's leaflets, there's other material right there. Yeah, take action, donate, leaflets, a whole range of leaflets that can be downloaded and printed out. Petitions. We have a new petition supporting Trump on pulling out the troops in Syria, directed to veterans, veterans organizations. Exoneration, seeking LaRouche's exoneration. And then at the bottom there, besides a welcome, then there's LaRouche's policies, a whole range of LaRouche's policies on the U.S. economy, on green fraud, you know, the green global warming hoax, on the global economy, on the end of empire, the evil empire, City of London centered global monetarist financial empire. So lots of material there. And a lot of it, there's videos in those different sections as well. So that's one website. And as I said, these pamphlets, like this CO2 pamphlet, besides the ones here, these are all available, you know, they can be downloaded, shared, no cost, you know. Although you can see donations. Wherever we have donated, I can tell you it doesn't pay my bills, but it takes money to print the literature and so on. Most of us, this is a voluntary effort, so virtually entirely. So, so there are no limits to growth. No limits to growth. This is, you know, I think the most important thing. If we get that out of our heads, then we can see how in fact we have succeeded and can succeed. So thank you for your attention. I hope that's a useful summary, but open for discussion, questions, thoughts, and hope that gives you an idea of what we're trying to, what we're setting in motion around the country now. Centered in New York, Baltimore, Boston, Chicago, Houston, Seattle, San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles. This is the Executive Intelligence Review magazine that comes out weekly. So that can be subscribed to online. That's at LaRouchePub.com, LaRouchePub.com. So in terms of weekly overview, the cover on this one is a picture of Putin, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, personal leadership in a moment of crisis. If people aren't aware, communism is dead in Russia, you know.
Some people don't know.
Yeah, some people don't know that. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want you to know that, I guess. How to Change History, the LaRouche Gold Proposal, Averting Global Depression. Second article, The Secret of How Trump Outflanked the War Party, by Helga LaRouche. Third article, In Syria, the Peace Plan is Underway, the reconstruction program for Syria and beyond in the Middle East, by Hussein Askari, our Arabic EIR editor. The EIR is published in multiple languages. And then section on science. Will Promethean science prevail? While NASA moves forward, Moon-Mars mission challenged by Democrats' impeachment fixation. Right? All of these things you were mentioning, that we're not doing all these things we should be doing because we're busy obsessing over, you know, the make-believe. But also mining helium-3 on the moon. You know, very informative. The most efficient, effective form of fuel for for fusion reactions is helium-3. Our magnetic field prevents it from collecting here on Earth. But the moon, which has no magnetic field, has collected tons of it. It's on the surface. It's, you know, goes down, whatever, a few meters, and can be mined there. So China, Russia are committed to going to the moon. They say to mine helium-3. So this is an article by Dr. Aaron Olson from the University of Wisconsin, who's a collaborator of Dr. Harrison Schmitt, right, the astronaut, a geologist, right, who collected samples on the moon, which among other things showed the presence of helium-3. And so out of the University of Wisconsin, they've been doing an ongoing set of studies and experiments, including developing devices for mining, you know, developing the proof of principle concepts for mining machinery that would work on the moon. And then an article, a very important article, Mark Carney's Rampage. More scientists reject climate hysteria as Bank of England screams bloody murder. Mark Carney is the head of the Bank of England, and he's the biggest promoter of the green global warming agenda. He's collected 30 central bank heads to have agreed that this greenlining process of shutting down all non-green investment has to be carried forward. In the meantime, it's now up to 500 scientists, leading scientists from around the world. I think at the time of this article it's 500. They've signed an open letter calling for the rejection of this whole green CO2 hoax, that there is no climate emergency. These are leading scientists. This is, you know, it's not a, you know, you hear these stories, all of the scientists agree, it's unanimous. No such thing. So this is, I mean, this is some of what we cover, and you can't get this material anywhere else in English. So.
One other aspect I found really interesting on the magazine, if you go to the home page, you have an archive, in which what Brian just went through with one issue, well, all the issues are on the site. You can actually pick a subject. You actually have the record of this fight, and especially now as this whole fight is breaking down, their ability to control and black it out is breaking down. It becomes a real tool for any member of this Committee of Correspondence to have all the backup to, you know, not only find the recent stuff online, but
Yes.
actually get the history
Yes.
of this in terms of these fights.
Yep.
You know, so people hear this stuff coming out on Joe Biden in Ukraine, but you can actually go to the actual reports and get the original fight. Who toppled the government? What did they bring in the Nazis? So people are actually becoming the experts, you know, and that's crucial to getting your nation back, as Ben Franklin said, you know. If citizens don't run it, who runs it? Well, you know, anyway, it's just to back up another aspect of the journal.
Questions, comments?
Were you going to be presenting anything about the space program here today, or? I mean, I know it's already been covered at that last.
Well,
At that last.
I can't. Oh no, we can. Keisha can. But let's see if there's. Did you have some specific questions?
No, I was just wondering if that was part of the presentation. I just told some people that that's what it was. That was part of what it was going to be. They're not here anyway. It doesn't matter. I've been to the presentation at the community center, so I've seen.
Sure. No, and we need to continue to do that.
Yeah.
And we have videos available on the web,
Yeah.
on the website that can be shown to friends or shared with friends,
Yeah.
or coworkers, or
I'll just take
or.
it there.
Mm-hmm.
And
I mean, there's
and we
definitely
wanted-
a lot more we could say on that, because you just had a major international conference that took place in Washington, D.C. with all of the leading space agencies.
Here, I'm going to turn this around for Keisha.
No, don't turn it around.
No, okay. Okay, all right, we won't.
All of the leading space agencies, and we can go through that, you know, in a moment. Unfortunately, there was one space agency that should have been there that wasn't there, which was China. But you know, that
But
could be.
so many people made us think about it that the State Department cleared up and they
Really?
appeared at the end, but they were there at the end instead of at the beginning.
Huh.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
question.
Yeah, it's not even clear yet whether
That's
they
not
actually
even
were able
clear,
to show
because
up.
they said that the State Department released their visas, but then the Chinese are saying that they released the visas too late. The conference was already going on and they couldn't make. Now that's what I'm trying to figure out, what the heck actually happened on that. So inquiring minds want to know. We'll find out soon. But no, we should get back to that in a minute. Well, I'd be curious to know. Obviously, people have questions on what Brian presented, but also what people are thinking. What your, you know, coworkers, friends, what's your ideas about? Because we keep bringing up is this idea here of Committee of Correspondence, and what we're looking for is leadership, leaders of the community, you know, people, and it's a process right now, because you have one, you know, today is Saturday. You guys took the time out. You're exceptional to come out here on Saturday, because most people got families. They got like he said, the economy breaking down, system. You know, people don't have the type of free time that they used to. Outside of that, we're competing with World Series, but you know.
I don't think that's gonna pan
But I
out
think they're
anyway.
gone somewhere anyway. But so you know, it's a process in
Yeah.
terms of getting people.
Got time for this, they can text,
Yeah, they could.
Facebook,
They got
and all that,
everything else.
but they ain't putting no money in that pocket.
Yeah.
Back to one person talking
Go-
about the
go
phones,
ahead.
phones and all that stuff, and they trying to, I guess, not really pay the cost. I mean, if we don't have products coming from the farm, we don't have beef to eat, what the hell we gonna eat?
Yeah.
That's a good question.
Better go up the highway to Centerville and get you a bunch of jerky, bring it back home and store it. They constitute it as needed.
Oh,
They're still
no.
selling it up there right now.
No, it's
Get
a
rid of the jerks.
You take like farming, it's been with us from way back. I mean, we got corn, got soybeans, got wheat. I mean, it's just a number of things that has been used to generate a lot of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, you know, I think we're gonna continue to have that, and, you know, I think it was cracking down, talking about the cow was doing stuff to the ozone and all of this. But, you know, I'm
Yeah, some of that, yeah, it's pretty silly, that stuff, the methane gas from farting cows and so on. Yeah, it's a good example. I mean, you know, in the 1930s, well, starting with the Dust Bowls that began in the 1920s, and the farm sector of the United States was being wiped out. And of course, most people then were on farms. You know, they weren't in the cities. And in fact, in some ways, that allowed people to survive better in the Depression than they would survive today, because people were on the land and they had skills related to the land. But you know, to save the American farmers, to protect it, the Roosevelt administration moved with bipartisan legislation, which set up parity pricing, which guaranteed to farmers, you know, a floor under the price of whether it was wheat and so. And the parity pricing, the Department of Agriculture still keeps as a matter of record. Every year they formulate for every crop what would be a parity price. But you know, long ago it stopped. You know, the actual enabling legislation was suspended, right? So it's just on paper. But these things are actually known. You know, the figures. You know, they're all approximate, but you know, it's a bottom line. So farmers knew, you know, what they could get, you know, for whether it was wheat or pork or whatever, what they could get, and that floor allowed, among other things, American farmers to produce for the war effort. You know, there wasn't some kind of massive conscription, and you know, they went out and rounded up all the hogs and, you know, shipped them overseas, you know, butchered them and sent them overseas. The American farm sector produced, you know, what was required for the war effort. And then we did things like, as you may know, you know, there was when there was too much of cheese, well, the government would buy a bunch of cheese and we'd give it away to developing countries, you know, where there was hunger or whatever, or butter things. You know, things were adapted, but the point was, we protected, you know, a productive sector of the economy. Americans, again, this is like novelty. People don't know today how we actually ran the country. You know, how the country was actually allowed to be productive. During World War II, the U.S. government and and financing through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, we were building plants, entire munitions plants, and then selling them for $1 to big production companies, aerospace or steel or whatever, to get the production that we required, because the private companies themselves were afraid to make the big investment, the big dollar upfront investment to build the new facility. Well, what if tomorrow, you know, you stop needing these warplanes or stop needing the steel or whatever, and we as the people through our government stepped in and said, damn it, you know, we've got to have this, we're going to build it. You know, it's willful. You know, man is a willful species. We willfully change the world. That's, you know, that's us, man, in God's image. Whether you think of it in religious terms or otherwise, man as a willful species is what's really fundamental to science. You know, to understand, you know, science is not objective, it's very subjective. Man is intervening in nature to shape it. What are you looking for? You make a scientific discovery because you're looking for something. You're out to make a discovery, to solve a problem, a solution. You know, a farmer is willfully making changes on nature. A machinist, tool and die, whatever, likewise is making willful changes and improving product and so forth. You know, LaRouche always talked about the suggestion box, you know, in every plant floor. You know, but it happens only because we decide collectively, you know, as citizens, we deliberate and we decide, okay, we have to ensure these conditions for farmers. We have to ensure that a, you know, productive farmer isn't going to go bankrupt, right?
But you know, one of the things I think that a lot of what we civilized individuals. You know, what do a body have to sustain a life? Clean water, clean air. You definitely gotta have food. I mean, you can't just drink water and live, because the body has to have something solid to consume. And your body's built with a system that processes all of that, and once that's over with and done, you have waste. You know, we can't just take waste and just dump it out.
Right,
we
right.
can live with it because it's got
Sure.
to go somewhere.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, most of our infrastructure was built in the 1930s or 40s, or immediately right after World War II. And so we've got to invest, again, in fresh water, in water management, sanitation. And, I mean, again, these are things we stopped thinking about. We just thought we could, like you said, on the cell phone, well, all we need is a cell phone and shuffle some paper. That doesn't...
But that don't cut it.
Yeah, right.
You know, I was a young 19-year-old just out of high school. I got drafted into the military. And I've traveled all over the world. And, you know, some places I've been, some things I've seen, I never thought I would actually get first-hand experience being there. Like over in Southeast Asia. The things that we used to throw out from our tables and kitchens and dining rooms, those people over there was glad to get it to eat, because, see, the enemy soldiers over there took everything from them. And they didn't give them nothing to eat, nowhere to stay. And it was hard, but I was over there between the age of 19 and 23. I got hung up in that Vietnam war. And I got to see firsthand what war really was all about. And the average American don't know that. They don't know, because they've never been there. So I think we need to go back and remember things where our grandpas and grandmas and dads and moms did for us. It kind of prepared us. You know, I was just up to Dallas Thursday. I had a first cousin that was 89 years old. And he was one of the last in that family. He was one of the soldier boys. And I was too, my dad was. But the average American, we enjoy freedom every day. But
Well, I think that's a reason why it's really important to put Lyndon LaRouche and his ideas and conceptions out there. He's you know, he just passed away this last February. He was 96. He was the World War II generation. He fought in the Burma, India, you know, Asia theater in World War II. Anyway, so he was absolutely, he saw that up close. He saw the process. He saw the British colonialism. He saw, all of that, and he was committed to. When he came back, like most Americans were, I think, committed to promoting the American system, around the world, making the world a better place. So he's a remarkable figure in terms of what he developed as a body of work. I've only just kind of skimmed a little of a bit of this surface, but it's an invaluable resource, and I think it's apropos to what you're saying about thinking about what our parents and our grandparents and so forth taught, learned.
Just bring you up to right
Generate.
Get some leadership, be responsible. Because I remember seeing it was a big gentleman that dedicated a memorial to veterans and stuff, and his topic was the price of freedom is not cheap. A lot of people, they take for granted, we got all this and we can have this and we can have this. But it's a cost,
Sure.
and we have to pay.
Yeah, and it's hard work. I mean, people think God created the universe, in some way to make it easy for us. He didn't, it's hard work to make the discoveries, to learn to make the discoveries that we.
Back when I was a kid.
This is what.
Back when I was a kid, see, a lot of people, they don't know nothing about physical work. During this time of year, every year, when I was a kid growing up, I was either in the hay field, cotton field, or corn field. And, you know, when you physically work from like sun up to sundown, consistent every day, African Americans don't know nothing about that.
Yeah, right. Did you have any comments, questions? I mean, you've been following things very closely.
I got lots of comments and questions. The basic gist of it is there a plan?
Is there a what?
A plan.
Well,
Because
yes.
the reason I asked the question is, I had a little boss who was a military guy, and said, it's great and wonderful that you have a problem. How come we with a solution?
Well, I think first of all, recognize how close we are to solving what has been an onrushing crisis since at least 1971, since the dollar was taken off the gold standard, gold reserve system, and LaRouche forecast that and wrote about it at the time. That's when he became famous, was his forecast of that.
I remember that.
Okay.
I'm shocked, but I remember
Okay,
that.
and so, you know, he posed it then. The question was there going to be fascism? Because if you take the dollar off the gold standard and you float the currency and you just have a currency without any underlying value, if you're going to continue to try to protect that currency, you've got to impose massive austerity. You've got to go to the same policies that Mussolini and Hitler and so forth went to. You've got to do that, and that's, you know, this is why you have this eruption today, is again austerity in Chile and France and Germany, whatever. I mean, people are just fed up. It's not just the immediate cost of this or that, it's cumulative over decades. And it's why Trump got elected, and it's why Brexit occurred, and it's why, you know, you've got this, has been termed a mass strike process occurring that's been occurring over the last several years. We're not sitting in a normal situation. It's a very dynamic process, and the oligarchy, you know, has lost control. They lost control of China. They lost control of Russia. They're losing control of the United States. So we really are far along towards solving the fundamental crisis, the crisis that we've been thrown into by the decisions made back in 70, 71, 72, and then the ongoing defense of those insane decisions, you know, ever since. That in terms of a plan, the plan is we have a president who's come to the fore, virtual miracle, you know, who's acting, you know, outside the controlled game, at the very moment where you have this combination of leaders in the world who are willing and capable of collaborating with him. Okay, we haven't talked so much about that, but I mean but that's a feature of the situation. This is what's allowing the settlement of the Syria crisis, for example. In the United States, we have this disaster in terms of the Congress, which you know, controlled from Wall Street and the City of London and as a subsidiary Hollywood, you know, in terms of money and so on and so forth. They've turned Congress into this zoo. But Congress, you know, is subject to the American people. They're subject to the American people demanding actual competent solutions. Now, if the American people don't have a clue, which right now, look, most Americans, as was said the other day by a friend of ours, one of our colleagues, you know, most people are, it's like they're being thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool and they don't know how to swim. Things are coming apart. You know, Congress, this is nuts, the impeachment thing is nuts. You know, most of what's happening around them is just, you know, outside. You know, we're transitioning 8-year-olds from one sex to another. You know, I mean, yeah, I mean.
These are symptoms of a much deeper and much more systemic problem.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
It's like we're trying to cure an illness with a Band-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't, and that, I mean, it goes to another dimension to what we're doing in them.
Right.
Which, you know, for example, on the November 9th, we have a cultural event here It's our annual Schiller birthday event for honoring Friedrich Schiller, a poet of freedom. It's a free event. We're inviting our friends. We have a chorus. We have choruses around the country. We do classical. We take people as they are. The choruses are open to learn to sing bel canto, to revive classical music, not just to perform the past, but we've got to create a culture again that can create classical, revive classical principles and apply them, which goes to Einstein and his violin and the question of what it takes to actually revive science, actual scientific discovery. Music isn't arbitrary. It's not a matter of just feelings or whether you feel like this or that or whatever. There's principles that celebrate and express the creative capacities of the mind and develop those qualities. We need those in the school. We need to, it's going to require an overhaul of education. So maybe that's some of what I assume that's part of what you're getting at. I can't see from me.
What is that?
This was the document that Marcia Bowen and I have been talking
Oh.
for some time.
Oh, okay.
Okay, this is the document she asked me to write down some things about.
Oh,
Okay. And like I said, it's symptoms of a problem.
right. So so the idea is, as part of what we're doing is we're multiplying, or wish to multiply these choruses, around the country. We want to open up this area to actual willful discussion. Classical principles can be discovered, can be learned, not just learned rote. You can try to do that. That doesn't work, but they can be discovered, and join in the celebration of these qualities of mind, the human mind. So this is a whole feature that's been a major feature of our work throughout, and it's why the Schiller Institute exists as a vehicle. I think it fairly be said as an umbrella organization internationally. I don't know. I don't want to go veering off too far. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, also, I'd like to know what more you have to say, but
Yeah,
to answer your, just to add to that, I think the key is, we're witnessing in the going out in the streets and talking to people. This gentleman here said he met us at the tax office. I met a bunch of people. We're there almost every day this week. That's what we do. We're at the post offices, the tax offices. You probably met us at one of those places one time or another, wherever we can go. But what you're getting right now is going back to this question of, the real issue at hand, the breakdown of the financial system. People are getting a sense that this is absolutely, it is right now worse than people could imagine. People are not in a delusion as to what's really going on. Some people don't want to accept it, and you bring that up to them. But I think the main thing right now is the fear factor, and thinking about what President Franklin Roosevelt said: we have nothing to fear but fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror that paralyzes needed efforts. And that's the intention right now, is to paralyze the efforts of the population to recognize that they have the power to stand up to this geopolitical imperial system that says that the power has been taken away from the people. And that's what we are trying to put forth back into the people. That, you think about, Mr. LaRouche always talks about what happened when people woke up after, in the call of World War II, that people were called to action. People said enough is enough. People took responsibility. Now today, that's the challenge we're running into right now, is people are afraid to go out. They're afraid to, open their doors, to
Talk to strangers about serious ideas. And if you're talking to them, it's not serious because you're on Facebook or Twitter or whatever talking to them, and that's what people, they rather be
in a facade. They'd rather be behind a closed door than actually getting out and saying, we're going to solve these problems together. We need to fill these kinds of rooms up. It's going to take leadership. It's going to take people like yourselves going out. You know, one thing, Brian put that brochure up, the magazine of the EIR. We have a daily, this intelligence publication has been out since the 1970s. What was it, 1976 or something?
74.
74? Good. Way before I was born. that LaRouche has been putting this forward. And we have a daily intelligence called the Executive Intelligence Alert that comes out, that we want to just completely smash the lying media. If you want to have access to truth, to what's really going on in the world, and to take leadership, you know, we don't want you to just read that and to subscribe to it. People subscribe to all different types of nonsense, but this is absolutely what you need. LaRouche has been on the record for decades, has been absolutely right in terms of being the leading economic forecaster. We wouldn't have been in this mess if people had, you know, adopted his policies. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, and we, in that sense, we prepared for this moment.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because they're really, you may have seen this, it may be in what Marcia sent you, I don't know, but Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, emphasized in his defense of poetry, he develops that poets are the unseen, unacknowledged legislators of mankind. And he's not talking about poets in the narrow sense, he's talking about poets, you know, in the broader sense, you know, Abraham Lincoln, for example, you know, but that in moments like the period we're in now, people become capable of imparting profound ideas concerning man and nature. They may not even be aware exactly of how those qualities came about or where they come from, but they're impelled, I'm now, you know, paraphrasing, they're impelled to express these higher concepts. And these are, you know, moments, truly revolutionary moments in history, and you can look at them. So we're not, you know, it's proceeding from what man is. Man is he or she, we all have creative capacities. So, but they're largely buried, you know, as Keisha was just talking about. So, but under conditions of crisis, yeah, if you're thrown into the deep end of the pool, you got to start trying to learn to swim real fast. If somebody will help you, so much the better, right? I mean, but the people are impelled, but also find in themselves in these times capability. And so again, this is something that the music, the cultural work that we do is another dimension, but also the economics. I hope I gave some sense of it. Lynn's economics really is beyond economics. It's going to more fundamental questions of the nature of man and the universe, and, you know, most fundamental questions we ask ourselves. People can and do respond to them. And that's what has the oligarchy freaked out, because they've seen this before. You know, this is the American Revolution. This is, right? So we should proceed not with pessimism, but with optimism, thoughtful optimism. But yeah, we need to develop these additional tools and utilize, you know, there is a broader, deeper problem in terms of axioms that have to be overturned and replaced with more profound
So let me see if
thoughts.
I can narrow this down.
In other words, we have a problem we got a great problem, going back to we have a great president, relatively speaking, a miracle as a president. We have a Congress that's a disaster. The question now is the American people. The American people are in motion. They elected this president. They completely blew apart all of the expectations. the media and all the pundits. The same thing is happening in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a dynamic. There's an opportunity. We've got to seize and promote and develop that potential into reality.
Right, okay.
So that's the plan, as best I can summarize,
Okay.
or we can summarize.
Kind of give you the mindset of what I'm hearing here and articulate this. We have an avenue via the president.
Mm-hmm.
Should have been also through Congress, but we don't really have much of an avenue there.
A
because
few
we're not
people, but
listening.
not a lot, yeah.
Okay. Back during the Cold War, and I'm not quite that old, but I do remember reading about it. The citizens of the United States had an instruction, for lack of better terms. If this happens, you as an American citizen need to do this, and this, and this, and this, in order to survive this so-called nuclear fallout. You need to get to a place that has this criteria.
Mhm.
Okay?
Right, fallout shelter and so on, so.
Yeah, okay. You need to stay there for X amount
I
of
was
time.
there, I did, I remember that.
But out of respect, yeah. But we were given these very specific instructions. I need you to get to this place immediately. I need you to stay at this place and prepare beforehand
Mhm.
for something like this possibility. And stay there for X amount of time because now according to our research, it's going to last,
Mhm.
say 3 months for the sake of
Mhm.
discussion. Okay, you stay there for 3 months. After that, you test and venture out. After that, you start to rebuild. It's a step by step by step thing
Mhm.
that each and every American citizen knew at the time.
Mhm.
This is the, boil it down to, as a citizen of the United States, I needed instruction. What do I need to do besides just simply go vote and talk to my neighbor? Okay? It's great to go vote.
Mhm.
It's great to talk to your neighbor. It's great to have the influence to do so. But, as an American citizen, I've got all these skills. Now, let me give you the background here. I've been unemployed for 15 months. Okay? And out of the system, I've put out over 1,000 resumes in that time. I'm either A, overqualified, B, underqualified, or C, why haven't you been employed in the last 12 or 15 months? So I'm no longer qualified for all three aspects. It's annoying, it can be a psychological battle, I understand that. But I've got a skill set that can help any company, and I can prove it. But I'm an untouchable because of whatever reason. Every person on this planet has some sort of skill set. Put it to use is the key. What can I, as an average American citizen that has this knowledge, has this background, whatever, how can it be put to use? You want to start a movement?
Mhm. Well, we've already started, yeah.
Okay.
Where can it
But you've
grow?
got to get beyond, it's an
Mhm.
idea, we've collected this data, we've put these leaderships in place, but how are you tapping into the experiences and knowledge and expertise of the people that are on the front line in a job or out of a job every day? Okay.
Well, you know, I got active by making the discoveries, and then I said to myself, I gotta share this. I got it. It wasn't even necessarily completely conscious. It was
Right.
eureka, the challenge is for you to make the discoveries as actual discoveries and go out with the same sense. My wife right now is with Victor, Victor Cirrus, organizer with us. He's a Iraqi war vet. My wife and Victor are at a congressional meeting confronting Lizzie Fletcher, it's supposed to be a meeting on veterans affairs that she's holding. So why is she calling for Trump's impeachment? She was one of the last to come along with the impeachment thing. But, here's Trump getting us out of the war. This is a step in the right direction. We're tired of our young men and women coming, however they develop it. They're calling on her to dump her, to reverse her stand supporting impeachment and actually start working to actually solve the problems that have created the problems for veterans, in the United States, as well as ending the wars.
Yeah.
But those are the things, I mentioned earlier, we were down at the City Hall addressing the city councilman, the Port Commission, you have state legislators, you have a congressman, senator, and the point is, there's a wealth of potential avenues through which you and your friends, having made certain discoveries, taking the plan, the 4 laws, it's a 3-page, in terms of a boilerplate summary, take these concepts and basically go to town with them and demand these congressmen support LaRouche's 4 laws, these 4 laws, these steps, and why not? And you are, so what are you going to do them? We got a whole bunch of congressmen that endorsed Glass-Steagall, but they didn't do anything to actually pursue it. It was just a surface thing. So you get my point. I mean, there's lots of avenues. They're right at your fingertips, but most people don't think of them because, first of all, they don't make what I'm calling the discovery or discoveries and say, yeah, I got to do something with these. I've got to go out with these ideas. Fair enough? Or you might want to...
I'm thinking, because this is, hold on. Go ahead.
Well, when you asked the question earlier
Sure.
about what's the solution, it's one of these things, and this is where the cultural identity and everything comes in. It's one of these times when the only way you can solve it is solve the whole thing at once.
Yes.
And so if you think through, as Brian just said again, the 4 laws, we're in a situation where the American population, individually and collectively, could understand with Glass-Steagall you could immediately freeze that entire international monetary system here in the United States, that debt we're being manipulated to pay, and basically set it aside, separate, get to the credit system where you have an avenue to credit the real economy into the physical economy, the infrastructure, and the scientific drivers. So you have in those 4 laws, based on that kind of science and a willful commitment, a nation as a nation, a president leading this, effectively organizing the population as we're doing, we could actually freeze the mountain of paper, not go under with it, put 8 to 10 trillion into the physical economy, gearing it up like the mobilization to win World War II, on the things, building the things we need for 50 years down the road. And we've got a situation where the world is now on that same page. China's actually ahead of us in terms of applying LaRouche's Hamiltonian policy in their own way. So you've got the alliance of forces to win that right now. Now, how do we as individuals, one, understand that and have the networks back us up deploying on that, and then 2, bring more and more people who are hungry for those kinds of solutions into an effective means where they see it's not just good ideas, not something that they say and then immediately get scared. Boy, I'm out from under the radar, I can get hit, right? The enemy is the one that's actually in a position now to be taken down. And just before this meeting, we were out, just had a number of leaflets left, stopped in on the parking lot of the Home Depot just over here. And in half an hour, I talked to one guy who just got off work. He says, my God, we discuss this at work all the time. It's not so much the ball games anymore, that's still going on. But there's a depth of understanding around this question, because they know it wasn't solved. They know the kids are lost if we don't do something immediately.
Yes.
So various individuals, they had other things planned, obviously, they didn't come to the meeting, but they were interested in this kind of a meeting. And that's going on in a lot of different ways. It's really, even the way they're brainwashing people that the campuses are all lost, these kids are lost. We've been on the campuses. You can get to the real subject, even though they're 180 degrees and they agree with all the green stuff. You pose some questions and they'll say, well, if they're honest, and many of them you can get there, I didn't think about it that way. They'll even say, I don't have to be the scientist. We got all the scientists lined up. But 2 seconds later, they understand these guys aren't scientists either, So we're in a situation where, again, top down and a grassroots that's ready, you have this Schiller moment where you can put the two together. And you got a president in the United States, and a president in Russia, and a president in China, and India, and about 125 other nations. But those four could sit down over the weekend right now and say, let's implement a new, Hamiltonian,
New Bretton Woods.
New Bretton Woods, that's what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
And there's not a thing the British Empire can do about that, except what they're doing is causing the chaos and trying to stop all that. So we have a lot of power that we don't realize we have, and we have an audience that's now more and more of an audience that can be organized. What we have to have is a durable presence in front of them, because they agree when you talk to them, and then 2 seconds later they're busy. And we got to get the ones that'll break off
And
the time.
we need more people to step up to the plate. Look, just to add, there didn't need to be the Cuban Missile Crisis. We didn't have, that was Americans terrified because Roosevelt died, Truman came in with Churchill and then said, okay, we're going to divide the world again, and we set East against West, and the communists against the freedom-loving West, and da-da-da. And we were set on a track towards a nuclear confrontation, which was rigged. It was an entirely rigged game. And so, sure, we were marched lockstep. I remember we went as kids, we lined up and we walked down to the fallout shelter, on a given day, and you could hear the sirens going. It was a test and so on and so forth. But that's not how you organize a successful revival in the United States. That's people going lockstep, following orders, because they're terrified about larger forces they have no comprehension of.
Right.
We've got to rise above, to a whole new level.
Right.
Different, you know what I'm saying. Anyway, we've got to be out of here by 4 o'clock. I'm sorry.